I've been in the like metaphysical world my entire life. It's not every day that I see something that I just go like, what is happening here?
You seem to understand metaphysics and magic in a similar sort of to how I do, and I just thought it could be a really interesting conversation.
It wasn't really until recently that it kind of dawned on me like, oh my God, wait a minute. We're completely redefining currency in such a big way. And I don't know if anybody really understands the metaphysical implications of that. I don't, I joke like every day that I always wondered what it would be like to live through history, like an actual like page in the history books. And every single day something happens and I'm just like, oh man, is this what it feels like? Like, I don't know about this. Um,
Yeah.
Metaphysics and material are converging in such a massive way that we've possibly never really recognized before on a mass level. And that's, I think, the key is that we are looking at this on a massive scale. People I know, my father, who is the least spiritual person I've ever met, has contacted me and been like, what the hell is going on here? Like something big is happening. So I think really that's the difference between right now and every other moment that's made history is that everybody seems to recognize it at this point. And maybe that's because it has to do with something that we need every single day. Like we're revolutionizing a core part of material existence.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's the whole world is primed for this sort of bizarre, like for it at a couple points over the last few weeks I have used the phrase that this is what the internet was made for. Just the idea that like, oh, it's been cool and it's been powerful and it's challenged us and we've had these social media and misinformation and all the good and the bad and the ugly, but now it's like if the internet wasn't in place, something like a blockchain, something like cryptocurrency couldn't exist. And now that it's here, and we're finally starting to explore all these different implications, I was hoping we touch on things like NFTs and different like the origins and stuff. But now that this is all here, it's like the implications of taking away a government's power to issue money by decentralizing, it's like like it's I can't decide if I think this is a bigger deal than the printing press or if it's a bigger deal than the advent of fire. You know what I mean? Like
It is huge. It really is huge. And I think that you know, as an astrologer, like that's really my core body of knowledge and work is in astrology. And when Pluto moved into Capricorn back in 2008, a lot of us were kind of, I don't know if wary is the right word, but we knew something big was going to happen because it implied already, it was setting us up for these really big destructive moments around establishment and power and government and banking and things like that. And then like the housing bubble burst and things like that. And everyone was like, oh, I guess this was the thing. Okay. But it seemed kind of anticlimactic because, bailouts happened and we went right back to the way things were. Pluto is still in Capricorn, and it moves out in 2024, give or take, with the retrogrades. So all of the timing really kind of perfectly aligns, and we're also looking at Uranus in Taurus. And I'm not a huge fan of the outer planets in a natal level. But when it comes to issues like this, like widespread societal issues, they really are great generational indicators. And Uranus and Taurus sets us up for literal revolution in so many of the day-to-day life areas. Things like food, things like money, things like housing, things that we require to be stable and secure. And here we are, not even really 3 whole years into this, and we're looking at 3D printed meat and, cryptocurrency explosions and, literally the entire stock market being turned on its head. Like, this is I have never seen such literal manifestations of some of these concepts, and here we are. Like what else can happen already? But especially when it comes to cryptocurrency, and like I was kind of thinking about the journey that it's had already, and how we got to this place. I don't know if we could have reached this widespread awareness if it hadn't been for the year we had in 2020.
Absolutely.
Everybody has kind of been stripped of their core beliefs in such a big way. The uncertainty has left us open to redefine, who gets to control our money and where it comes from and what it looks like. And I think it's actually pretty impressive, that it's changed in such a big way in such a small amount of time.
Really makes you think. I mean, actually, what really sparked my reinterest in this, because I first started to actually learn for myself about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin in 2017 because it was spiking and it was in the news, and I was like, I had this intense FOMO, well, I gotta know I need to know what's going on so that I don't feel bad later. So I forced myself to get through. I've got a lot. I still have a learning anxiety hangover from high school, and so learning how a technical subject like Bitcoin worked was a bit of a challenge for me. But I after I learned it and it started to crash, I stopped paying attention to it. But this time, what actually made me pay attention to it again was you mentioned the stock market. It was the GameStop news. That was such an absurd story. It was so interesting. But even as I was experiencing it, what I realized was that suddenly I'm at home. Everybody else is at home. I'm bored. I'm watching this news unfold. I've downloaded an app, and it just so happens that this app is right next to the same class of a bunch of other apps that let you buy and trade cryptocurrencies. And so, in addition to the, it was a really fascinating moment of class consciousness, right? There was certainly that angle of stick it to the hedge funds. But then there was the, here's all these apps stopping people from trading so that they're, essentially manipulating the price for their own benefit. That poured a little fire on that class consciousness. And then you're just sitting there, and not only did you just have this clear divide between the rules for the elites and the rules for the poor thrown in your face, you also have all the tools at your disposal that you've just familiarized yourself with as a means of taking part in this moment in history that are now going to let you do something else. And that's when I was like, I think it's time for me to start paying attention to cryptocurrency again. and so it's funny to look back and be like, if Reddit hadn't YOLO'd into GME, I don't know if I'd be on this chat with you right now.
I do
but
think
it's funny
that
how
was
it
a
comes
big
together.
turning point. Yeah, I think that was a big turning point for a lot of people, because I think that made it relatable in a way that maybe money hasn't been before. And this is a concept that I think has also been kind of growing, especially in the last few years. But I've heard a lot of people kind of, again, that relationship with money and redefining it almost as if it's its own entity. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that is really important to consider. Last year, probably around the summer, I don't remember exactly what event sparked it, because God knows there were about 900 major current event things that happened last year. But someone in conversation had mentioned the egregore of the United States. And I was like, oh, okay, I've never really thought about it like that, but that makes sense. And
what's that?
Okay,
the
so
egregore?
The egregore, yeah. So it comes from this Greek word that basically it was used in the Book of Enoch to refer to the angels that came to Earth to watch over humanity. And yet it through occult, texts has kind of become this concept of a collectively generated entity that takes
so like an aeon?
Sort of, yes, but sort of, okay, so like tulpa, sort of like a massively scaled tulpa,
Don't know that one either.
So that one's definitely more of like a Tibetan Buddhist idea. So like think about like Slender Man. Do you remember Slender Man? Okay,
Sure.
so Slender Man, yeah, I know, who could forget? So Slender Man is one of those entities at this point that people have designated as a tulpa. Like he started as kind of a meme and then grew to like an actual pop culture boogeyman. And you
Sure.
have girls in whatever state that was saying that he possessed them to murder somebody, like that kind of thing, where you have an idea that grows and takes on a life of its own, and it's through collective belief that it
Right.
continues to grow and feed.
Do you know about like the night hag mythology?
Yeah.
Right, like there are certain cultures, and I think everybody has. I think it's probably the exact same class of hallucinations as
Yes.
Slender Man, but Oliver Sacks in Hallucinations writes a little bit about how there are cultures where they have a strong belief that there's an evil woman that will sit on your chest and kill you in the night. And it's the sleep paralysis demon that everybody has, right? Like if you happen to have sleep paralysis, you'll probably see an entity because it's just your brain's way of trying to explain what's going on. But if you have a strong cultural belief that she can kill you, she totally can. Because the fear, it stops your heart. And so you'll have like perfectly healthy people that die because of this embedded belief. So, I mean, it's just really interesting it seems like the same thing.
A really great example of like a tulpa, because even in Tibetan Buddhism, there is a belief that, it is your belief that feeds it. So if you don't believe in it, it can't hurt you.
Right.
And I don't really think, personally, I don't think egregores work on quite the same scale there because it's a collective. And you are not in control of the collective. So your belief only is a part of it. And so like when they mention things like the egregore of nations, it's this collective entity that we've created to embody that nation. And I think even, like the egregore of the United States has undergone massive, shifts and changes in the last year or so as well. But money is also its own kind of egregore. And I think that for a long time, we've seen it as something that we don't control. It's something that has its own life. It's something that we participate in and have a relationship with, but ultimately it rules us. And this, I think, is a huge change in that, all of a sudden. Yeah, like I think that, everything kind of shut down last year and a lot of people were out of work and not making money and not paying their rent and all these other things. And it became very clear that the egregore of money is a little more fluid than we thought. Things changed, things shift. And I think in a way that disbelief, the collective horror and uncertainty killed the entity that we thought we were working with and left a space open for something new. And that, I think, is kind of unprecedented. It takes so much uncertainty to shake a foundation like that.
Yeah.
And it was this perfect storm. And now people are realizing that we do control money in a bigger way than we thought.
Well, and I think that's a very interesting point to mention because one of the things that I've been talking a lot about over the last few weeks, because I've been getting very. I've had more than one of my friends say, dude, what happened? Because like the last couple of weeks, all I've been doing, like every single thing I've posted on like my Facebook or my Instagram has been about cryptocurrency, blockchain, NFTs, all of it. And so as a result, you change your frequency like that. Inevitably, you're going to have a couple of people reach out and say, hey man, can you explain this to me? And one of the tools that I've been using to explain it, because I really want people to walk away from it feeling a similar understanding to what I feel. So I try to go way back. And there's actually a book that I've been referencing a lot called Debt, The First 5,000 Years. I love this book. It's by the anthropologist David Graeber. And I mean, he doesn't talk at all about cryptocurrency in it, and yet it usually makes like the top 5 fintech books to read because what he does is an amazing job of explaining how money and more than money, debt, human debt, has worked for the last 5,000 years of human history. And I think probably the most profound insight I took from that book was about the origins of coinage, of currency as we know it, of this concept of a token that represents value, as opposed to, it used to be you would do favors for your villagers and they would owe you favors, and that was the whole economy. But at a certain point, coins come into the mix, and then you get markets, and you get this impersonal, different kind, and that's where money starts to take control, you could say. And one of the major things Graeber explains is he's like, we have this myth that currency was invented to solve barter, but barter, according to the myth, has never the myth of barter, like it's kind of a cartoon, and no human culture has ever actually bartered that way. And so currency wasn't actually invented to solve barter. It was invented to solve a different problem, and that problem was, how does a king raise a standing army? And the trick is, mint coins, issue them to soldiers, and then tell everybody else that they owe you taxes. And by creating that trifecta, what it ultimately boils down to, and what felt so significant to me, is that, as you get in, and this is one of the things that's really interesting about crypto in general, is that it forces you to think about things you've never had to think about. And to understand why Bitcoin's valuable, I kept having to ask myself, okay, well, why is money valuable? And people will say things like it's tied to gold, or everybody agrees it is, but that just doesn't feel satisfying, right? It doesn't feel like the answer. You follow it back long enough, it's valuable because governments impose violence on their citizenry to make it valuable. And that's why the United States dollar is the most valuable currency in the world, because the United States government has 11 aircraft carriers threatening countries that don't pay their debts. And so fundamentally, the value proposition of the legacy currency we've been using, it is, if the government dissolves, the money you've accumulated in that currency loses its value. And so fundamentally, you have to keep that relationship of violence going to keep the money valuable. And, there can be violence and stuff. And the thing that really stood out to me is that the money doesn't work without the violence. It can't. And if you don't have that relationship of violence, people don't have a reason to want gold coins, right? Like, it's just gold. You can't eat it. You can't enjoy a sunset with your children. The things that are really valuable, gold is just it's just stuff. So in order to keep it valuable, there's always had to have been this state violence backing it. And the thing is, the reason I was saying this is because you mentioned that, it's like, we aren't in control of money, money's in control of us. Like, even the kings who created the first coins and used them to raise their armies, very clever, good job. But once you've created that relationship of violence, now you want the most gold you can get too, because the more gold you have as a king, once you've started this cycle, the further away you are from violence. The more people you can pay to protect you and your kingdom and your state, the more force you'll be able to exert over other kings and kingdoms. And so even if there was a very clever person at some point that figured out, like, hey, we could issue these tokens and then threaten people if they don't give us taxes, and that'll make the tokens worth something. As soon as you do that, it rules you now too. And I was just like, that's a really interesting thing, that now we have this decentralized ledger technology where it's based on a completely different spiritual axis, right? Like, it's not the violence that gives Bitcoin its value. It's a community belief in an ideal. And like, holy shit, like, that's a big deal, man. Yeah,
no, that is a huge kind of, that's a massive shift in what, like, I was thinking actually recently, totally unrelated as far as how it came into my head, but I was thinking about the inventage, that's not a word. I was thinking about the invention of coins. And that was, I believe, the first people to use coins were the Lydians. And it was just so that they had a weighted measurement. It was just like, okay, well, how much gold? This much gold. Here it is. Here's our coin. And they were the first people to figure that out and do it. And then the Persians come in and wage massive war on them and, subsume them into that empire. And much of that the Persians were massive. It was a huge scaled empire. And now the whole ancient world is using coins. And, this is, I think, when people, I remember what it is. I think a lot about word origins. And we were talking about, I think, the origin of the word minting. And it obviously led right back into like, measuring out the amount of gold for a coin. And I'm thinking like, who the hell decided that though? Like, that's a weird thing. But that's it just spread across the world. And now I think that we tend to associate the material with value. Like everyone that I know who, and I can say this because I had a terrible relationship with money most of my life. Most people that I know think about the value of the thing, where it's just like, oh, I got a bonus this month, I'm going to go buy myself a purse that I want. Or like, you invest, for lack of a better word there, in physical rewards. And so Bitcoin, I think for a lot of people didn't really catch on at first because there wasn't a whole lot you could physically do with it. And now the entire world is in a very different place. And I think we've all been I know I've been trapped inside with all of my stuff going, oh, I don't need stuff at all. Like I need assets, like I need to stay afloat. I need money to go out and make more money for me. And that's, I think, another huge thing that people are realizing, where it's not about trading your time and your energy and it is energy, of course, everything's energy, but it's not about going out to your terrible office and trading your time to get that money back. You can put money into money and have money come back to you. And this is such a mind-blowing concept for the majority of, I think, middle and so on class people, because that's not how we were raised to think about money. Right. It was go out, go to college, put yourself in debt and get a good job so you can repay that debt and then some. And now it's just like, no, you have a portfolio, and your portfolio goes and does the work for you, and you invest based on what you believe in. And I think that's also what the GameStop debacle taught everybody, is that belief is powerful. Short sellers might be, betting against it, but if the public rallies and says, no, I believe in this thing, well,
and for whatever reason they happen to have for believing in it, even if that belief is literally just to spite the short sellers, it's as long as you can coordinate people and you get that network effect, and then there's a feedback loop, and boop, oops, there goes $1 billion. Sorry, Melvin.
It's incredible. And I think it's a perfect illustration of the sort of collective energy that, we've been lacking for such a long time. And I think that history is such a strange loop. It's so weird. It's the pendulum swings, man. That's all I can say. And we came to a point, I think, where radical individualism really ruled the day, and it caused a lot of its own issues. And now
it still is.
Well, we're not done with it. And I think everything in balance, everything in moderation, which is not exactly something that humanity does well right now. But we've started to see this massive swing towards collectivism, and the idea that discussing some of these maybe slightly more classically taboo topics like money and religion and gender and things like that with other people, we're not as dissimilar as we've been led to believe that we are. And if we put those collective beliefs, or if we put those beliefs into a collective, then we stand to make really immense changes in the world. And if ever there was a time to need it, I mean, this is biblical times.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that segues into something else that I wanted to talk about, which is so one of you mentioned like the taboo subjects. I wanted to add art to that, right? Like now we've got this right now we've got a huge conversation unfolding online and in the news and everything about this thing called NFTs. And what do you know about NFTs?
Okay, so this is a sort of new development for me. I'd only heard about this really within the last couple months.
Okay.
So I know they've been around for longer than that, but I'm new to this conversation.
Okay.
But the idea that, we now are seeing a crypto art market, is incredible. My first reaction was like, wow, this solves art theft once and for all, because you can trace that on blockchain, and but it's such a powerful idea that now artists can take control of the sale and the life of their work in and of themselves. That really struck me as holy crap, like.
I think with Bitcoin, there's all these myths and these ideas about money that you have to sort of explode, analyze, and reassemble in your brain to wrap your head around it. And I think that's mimetically that's really powerful for human consciousness in general. I think with NFTs, we're experiencing a similar thing with art, because it's not quite the same as I've first gotten into it and looked at it. Like, there's this sense that you're hard coding ownership of a digital art thing on the blockchain, and that's one of the big things that's been in the news, because like there's that artist Beeple who sold a digital collage for $69 million, right? And that's the first time in human history that, as far as we know, that somebody has been able to sell ownership of a digital asset like that, because of the nature of digital media is, one of the main things everybody says when they learn about NFTs is, it's just a JPEG. I can just copy and paste it. There was an artist, there was a documentary I was watching on this YouTube channel called The Defiant. It's a great channel for anybody that's trying to learn about all this new blockchain nonsense. But they had a soundbite from an artist named Zem. And Zem's perspective on NFTs really caught me as, I think, a little bit more insightful than most of the noise in the space, because it's still very new, and I think people are just still trying to figure out what the hell they are. And I think there's a lot of people who think they've figured out what they are and still don't quite get it. And I think that's kind of par for the course with the space. Like that Bitcoin's like that too, right? Like you can dump a bunch of money into it and still not really understand what the hell's going on. What Zem mentioned was that what NFTs have done is they have created a new dimension for human beings to achieve consensus through. And I liked that because it felt like a more wide-ranging and primordial answer to what the hell they are. Because fundamentally, they're kind of like just ownership certificates over things that don't exist in the meat space, right? Like they're cyberspace ownership certificates. But the idea that Bitcoin, blockchain, solved the problem of consensus with regards to money, well, that right up until this point, we've had to use banks, we've had to use governments to achieve consensus, right? Rather than doing it through networks, doing it through community, we achieve it through offloading the power to determine the truth onto somebody else. And there's a lot of problems with that, because you always end up with corruption. Inevitably, you always, even if you have a righteous king, he'll die eventually, right? Like you always end up going back to square one with that stuff. And so with NFTs, they've taken the technology of blockchain and expanded what it can do to where now you can achieve that consensus on more things than just a cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. And so when and I think it's really powerful and interesting, because when you look at the $69 million sale of this Beeple digital art, and you think about, okay, what what do you mean? Like I can go and I can look at it for free. I can download it to my computer. I can copy and paste it. I can print it out, but I still don't own it. But somebody does. That concept, I think, is a little bit harder for people to wrap their heads around than even Bitcoin, because we're used to using bank apps. We're used to using digital money. We're not used to thinking about the implications of a technology that makes it so everybody can just agree that somebody owns a thing, and that's all it is, like ultimately. And people will pay for that. And thinking about what art is in that sense. And I think one of the most interesting things that I've learned just from learning about the NFT space is that, like, ultimately when somebody pays a bunch of money for a piece of art, like when an artist like Banksy becomes extraordinarily popular and valuable, it's because people with wealth are paying to be a part of that artist's story. And that's all it is. They don't. It's not really about the art. It's not about the physical item. The physical item only serves to prove to the world that that person is a part of that artist's story, or even not the artist even, but the piece itself, right?
It's, oh man, I could totally rant about this for a very long time. So I actually went to school for art, and specifically art criticism, which in itself is like such a oxymoron. I don't know, like I started actually, I started in fine arts, and then I went to photography because the process of photography was fascinating to me, this truly alchemical process. And I ended up getting disgusted because we didn't read a single book through my entire program, and I decided to switch into the art criticism program, and quickly found the most repulsive mindset I'd ever come across, which was the institutionalization of art, where it's, it's not about the thing, it's not about the sentiment, it's not about the artists themselves even, it's about whether or not an institution values it. So, you have artists like Banksy, and when Banksy sells for, millions of dollars or however much it's valued at now, it's not because anybody thinks it's good. It's because an institution has deemed it historically worthwhile. And with that, you run into a lot of problems with reproductive arts, for mechanical reproduction. So things like photography, where you can make 25 prints or more, is always going to be inherently less valuable to an institution than something of which there's only one. There's only one Starry Night that's ever going to be made, but, there's going to be probably a dozen or more like Robert Mapplethorpe prints. So that will inherently devalue a piece, even if you're talking about the negative itself. It's like, oh yeah, but you can use it to make more, so it's less valuable. And here are NFTs, which are, from what I understand and what I've seen, run in editions. But there might be 6,000 in an edition, and people are still paying thousands of dollars to collect them because they like it, they believe in it, and it's no longer about the institution. It's valuing art on an individual level, which is pretty incredible and totally unheard of, as of yet. This is a huge shift in all of this.
And certainly for digital artists, I think, because one of the things I've seen is people talking about how, like, up until this point, people have treated digital artists more like tradespeople, right? Like, cool, neat trick, we'll follow you on Instagram, we'll like your post, we'll hire you for our video game at some point, or we'll hire you as a graphic designer or something like that to design this poster. But the art itself hasn't been valued for how cool or wild it is. So I think in particular, because I've been following people for a long time, and to see like, one of the things that really stood out to me was that up until October of last year, the most people had ever sold a piece for was, I think, a signed print that they sold for $100. And just a couple months later, one of the most valued artists in living history. Like, that to me, obviously there's a certain degree of hype, right? And there, inevitably, part of why people's work became so valuable is right place, right time. One of the first, certainly as far as I know, the first exclusively digital piece of art to be auctioned off at a major, institutional art house. And so there is that story, there is that institutional historical interest behind it. But I think more than anything, it symbols very much a paradigm shift for artists, especially digital artists, who have only had their medium exist in a place that is infinitely reproducible. Now having a technology that allows you to generate scarcity in the digital realm.
It absolutely is, I think it's also testament to that, I had not heard of Beeple before this, but, that piece was a collage of
there's so much
many
visual
pieces,
information in that.
Exactly. And that was like their entire career collaged, which I think, does have value. You're basically giving your entire body of work to someone. Yeah, you better value that high, that's your entire body of work. But And that was Christie's. Like, that wasn't just like some, like local auction house. That was Christie's. That's going to go down in history. Like, there's already art classes being taught about that, I'm sure, like already in the works. This changes everything for the digital art market and illustration and, all of the arts that have been criminally undervalued. I know so many comic artists and digital illustrators that have been talked down to their entire careers by people who, think that what they do is better, or this does empower people so intensely. And then to write a provenance into code and literally transfer that, it's not just, like, oh, I'm saving this off the internet. I've also seen a number of what appear to be like trading cards at this point. In fact, I think, what was it, Topps? Was it Topps who got into this at this point?
There's NBA Top Shot is a really big brand right now.
Yeah. I remember them doing physical trading cards, or I guess I thought it was Top Shot. Maybe it was just Topps that I'm thinking of. But that's like a perfect application for something like this. And now you're not just selling like, oh, I've got my like rookie what's his face card. I don't sports, so I don't know how these. I don't like. But to say like, oh, I have purchased this clip of my favorite sports star doing the thing that he does.
This slam dunk. I own this particular moment in time.
Yeah, and that I think even on a collectible level is pretty powerful to buy a part of history like that.
Yeah.
And this is the paper snowflake reality, because it's like you are buying a piece of history, and by buying that piece of history, you are a piece of history, and all of this just folds on top of each other, and what even is anymore? This is incredible.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's actually a really great point as far as like, I've been having a lot of conversations about NFTs because it's all the rage, and obviously I'm plugged into cryptocurrency already. Thanks, Reddit. But specifically the history, the with the word story, like one of the things I thought about when I was trying to wrap because I learned about NFTs and I decided I'm going to try and figure out how to make one. A friend of mine actually gave me a tip. He was like, dude, everybody's talking about this right now. And I was like, oh, I'll wander into it. And it's like, oh, maybe I can make the first pancake art NFT. And so I did. I minted a pancake art NFT. And through the process of it, it kind of got me to wonder like about why somebody would buy it if they did. Because it's not physical. It's exclusively digital. And ultimately, the image it's tied to is almost incidental. Because where I realized really lies is it lies in that list of owners. It lies in that blockchain programmed list of ownership. Because I realized that like you take one of the greats, take Frida Kahlo or Vincent van Gogh and go through history and ask yourself, would you like to be listed as the first owner of Starry Night on that placard in the museum? Would you like to be like embedded in history as the first person to have paid a significant sum to help this artist eat? The concept of story, of access, of conspicuous support for somebody or something you believe in, like all the same concepts that are exploded and explored by Bitcoin, right? The idea that you can create a valuable currency out of community belief. What NFTs are doing is they're allowing artists to have a vector for creating belief in themselves, for giving people in their community. And that's another word that has popped up a lot in my conversations is that like there are, with this Wild West mentality of the gold rush, everybody rushing in, like, we got to make some collectibles out of every damn thing. You're going to have a lot of fluff. You're going to have a lot of noise and people that are not necessarily appreciating what it is able to do or why it works on a deep level. But I think the artists that are going to be able to use this long term for their benefit are the ones that understand the way that this is a tool for leveraging and connecting with a community of people who like you and like your work and find your work beautiful. It's like Patreon on drugs. It's a whole new kind of community monetization model. And again, I think it ties back into that whole like you're monetizing belief in a way that's never been possible before. And so when that's what it is, it comes back to buying that node in that story. And I don't know. I think that's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation, was because like I want to see more conversations like this with people exploring these ideas. Because a lot of, and I think it's probably important to bring this up because a lot of the conversation about NFTs is about their immorality, right? I don't know if you've heard this about the environmental impact.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, there's the environmental impact, and then there's also the idea that it has created a new vector for art theft. And I have you heard that one?
I've not actually, which it's a little surprising to me to hear that.
So that one in particular, there's a couple of platforms that have come out of the woodwork to try and make it so you can monetize tweets.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And so in the wake of that, there have been people who, or maybe a lot of them are probably bots, but they will show up, an artist will share an image on Twitter, and then this bot will show up and say, @tokenized tweets. And then this website that tokenizes tweets will tokenize their tweet and try to sell it or put it on a marketplace. And a lot of, obviously, if somebody that is not plugged into the world, that does not understand NFTs or blockchain tech and has never had a major reason to, and somebody shows up and starts selling a tweet where you tweeted your art, the impulse is going to be, oh God, how messed up is this? This person's stealing my work and selling it, and some crypto bro is going to come along and buy it, and I'm not going to see a cent of it, and this is another way for artists to get screwed. Down with NFTs.
Yeah.
I personally, I think that's a bit of an overreaction, but it's mostly because, like I was saying, like it's the value. They're not really selling the art; they're selling a story, and so it's in that case, I think it's more of the Brooklyn Bridge scam, right? Like selling something you don't own.
Exactly.
It's not valuable. It doesn't have the provenance. It doesn't have the, you didn't actually buy that piece because the person that made it didn't authorize you to. So the NFT, you did buy an NFT. But you're the person that bought the NFT is the one getting screwed, not the artist. And that's the thing that I think people are missing.
Exactly. No, that's I think a really, I think that's another thing I've seen a lot of with some of these technological things that have started to come up, where there's always going to be a capacity to use it for not so great purposes.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going
it's a neutral
to be.
Power.
Of course, and it's up to the user to be discerning and understand what your action means, because that's what it is. It's your action that gives it meaning. It's not necessarily the thing of itself. So there are absolutely always going to be people in the world who see nothing but the capacity for bad and go, burn it down. Shouldn't exist. If there's any reason that it could go wrong, it shouldn't be here. And that is reactionary. And also negates a lot of the benefit that it has, because what those people are saying is that the potential for theft is worth more than the potential for importance and reverence and
liberation,
recognition. Exactly. So that seems like a really negative lens to see the world through ultimately.
I get it, and I do get it. Like, it's, to be fair, it's like, it's one of those things where if I try to put myself in the shoes of somebody that, if you don't know any of this, all the stuff we're talking about, right? Because I've, been plugged into this world for a while. I've done a lot of research, and like, I feel like I can wrap my head around what an NFT is and why it's valuable. But it's true that we've never had to think about things like ownership and things like what art actually is and what you're actually buying when you buy a piece of art before. We've never really had, like, it's always been something that you could very easily take for granted. And so, yeah, I think I can totally understand somebody, it would feel wrong right off the bat to have somebody show up, me not knowing anything about NFTs, tokenize a tweet and see that this thing I made is on sale on a marketplace and the money is going to somebody else. Like, I would immediately be like, what's going on? But so, and that's why I wanted to have these conversations, because I'm like, I want more of this nuance out there so that more people can move past their fear and sort of step into an understanding and more of a mastery of it so they can use it rather than feeling like it is being used against them.
I think that that's a really valuable point to make, though, too, where the people who are going to immediately react against a potential negative perception that they have are probably the people who are brand new to this and have never heard about it or don't know enough yet to understand the real story behind it. And I think that's a larger problem right now across the world, as far as we need to learn more. If something feels threatening to us, we need to learn why. We need to understand what it is that we're reacting against and all the possible perspectives that go into that. And, maybe that fear and that anger and that reaction will be totally justified, depending on what you find. But it might not. And I think that continued education on a personal level, the curiosity in the world around you is more important than ever. Because these new concepts are not the end, NFTs are not the only new thing that's ever going to exist again. It's going to keep happening. We've already seen so much innovation.
And faster.
Exactly. Like we could talk about time compressing and all of that, but this is a very real thing. Things are speeding up and we need to be on top of it. If you're going to be scared by all of it, and I can say that as somebody who spent the better part of the last year hiding under my desk going, just make it stop, make it stop. So, this is going to keep happening. Let's figure out how to learn as much as possible so that it's not scary and we do understand it and we see the nuance to things. Things are not black and white. There's really not much in life that is. So the more we learn about the gray areas and the potentials that things have for both benefit and harm, the better we can come to a decision about our participation in it. And I think that's another thing to remember is that, you don't have to participate in NFTs if you don't like them or you don't understand them. You can walk away. But you don't necessarily have to scream and, throw fingers and make it a bad thing either. This is a new technology. It's going to go through a learning curve too. Everything does.
Yeah, and I think with, talking about the idea that it's not black and white and that it's not cut and dry and that there's nuance and there's complexity, and one of the things that I think has really gotten under my skin lately, because I keep subjecting myself to it, I am a social media warrior, for better or for worse. And so I find myself, I'm basically subjecting myself to pile-on emotional abuse in my attempts to educate. And Twitter is like the worst medium in the world to try and have a conversation, because you're so limited in how much you can say. There's no nuance to your expressions and your body language, and people can't hear from your tone that you're in good faith, and yada yada yada. And so it's much easier for people to just dunk on you and then like the other person's comment. But one of the other things that I wanted to touch on was the other really, really pernicious narrative against NFTs, which is the environmental narrative. And I don't know if you've heard anything about this.
I have, and it honestly doesn't make that much sense to me. But, I think it's because I tend to come at things from the bird's eye view to begin with, where I'm just like, but the computers are already going. So is that one line of code really making that much difference?
Well, and that's the narrative, and a part of the reason that the story that so when you mint an NFT, that is a blockchain transaction, and when you sell an NFT, that is a blockchain transaction. And on certain platforms that allow you to sell NFTs, bidding on it, not even buying it, but bidding on it, is a blockchain transaction. It depends on how the contract is set up, but so every one of those transactions, there were a couple of websites that got it into their head that every single transaction was like the carbon footprint of securing a whole block or something. And so the thing is this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how blockchain technology works. Like what you said about the computers already being on, that's basically the truth. The metaphor I've heard is that it's like a train, and the train is running. And you can be on the train or you can be off the train, but the train is going to run either way, and it's going to burn approximately the same amount of energy whether you're participating or not. Part of the reason that the environmental narrative has seeded in and been so, there's a joke about how much harder it is to like debunk bullshit than it is to spread it. But part of the reason is that there were these websites that were taking individual pieces of crypto art, looking at how many transactions they had gone through, calculating how much energy was burned on the block that transaction went through on, and ascribing a carbon footprint to the piece of art based on that. And so you'd end up with these accusations of artists burning the energy of an entire German citizen for 40 years for one piece of art. And like respected publications and like, you know, mainstream media putting these things in there and talking about like how much energy it's burning, and without any analysis of how much energy the old systems burn, or all the networks of storage houses and staff and the buildings and the office buildings and the banking system and all that burn. Like that's not analyzed next to it. All that we need to do is look at blockchain in a vacuum and also misunderstand how it works. And so the main core of the environmental narrative is that it's ultra bad for the environment, super bad for the environment, because a single artist burns the energy of 40 years of German life on a single piece of art. Now imagine if they make more than one piece of art. Can you even imagine how much it's going to burn? And it's like, no, like it's a train. It's going to run. If you stopped burning that NFT, all the energy you're saying that artist is at fault for using still gets used.
The really interesting thing I think about this is that we're talking about the value of data. Literally, you know, like this is digital information, and we are ascribing a value to it, both monetarily and through our belief and value of the artist. And then there's another. So when I talk about this paper snowflake reality thing, everything is just folded on top of each other, and we make these little cuts, and nobody has yet, I think, looked at it as like, oh, look what we did here. Because the news outlets that are reporting on, 40 years worth of carbon footprint on one piece of technology, they're also misvaluing that data. So maybe it is actually, if you're starting that computer up every single time you need to make a transaction, but that's not the data that's actually being used. And we are now misvaluing that data and putting that out there. And there are people who will find that data more valuable than it really is over, all of this. And I'm fumbling words because there's so much there to just unpack in itself. But, I think that's another thing that we need to reevaluate on so many levels is the data that we value. Where does it come from? How do we read these reports? What statistics are valuable and what statistics are noise? All of these things are pretty new. We didn't need to think about this just, 10, 20 years ago. And there are people out there that, their brains aren't quite as malleable as, kids who are just hopping into this world and, up and running now, minting their own NFTs after high school. That's
in
not
high school.
Everybody. Exactly. That's not everybody. So we need to reevaluate what data is valuable. And we're seeing it over here. It just now needs to kind of backtrack, like almost, I don't even know if that's a natural process where I don't think it's back compatible like that in ways. But it is an interesting echo that I think we need to consider. I can't help but be struck by how like Discordian this all is. And, this is like an E-prime situation where like we're looking at language in totally different ways, meaning totally different things that don't really mean what we think that they do, and applying them to new situations, old situations, and we should probably think really long and hard before we assign a linguistic value to something. And something like, oh, but the carbon footprint is worth this. that's not a value that actually means what we think it means. And I keep trying to encourage people to really like examine the words you're about to say before you say them, because they probably don't have the application that you think that they do.
It's sort of like we're extrapolating with data that is no longer relevant.
Yeah,
I think that's a big part of what's so interesting about this time in history is that, you know, and this is not even with NFTs, but with Bitcoin and with cryptocurrencies in general. One of the main things I run up against when I'm talking to people about this online is this idea that there's a lot of this deeply embedded cynicism, deeply embedded sort of a learned helplessness, I would say, that we have been living under a certain like oppressive system for running all of this stuff for so long that like lots of people, I would even argue most people, think it is ridiculous that we could have invented something that changes that fundamental math, that there could be a way of doing money that isn't fun, that won't by default accumulate in the hands of the richest and lead to the exact same social structures we've had all this time. And it's one of those things where it's very hard to debunk that narrative when you're dealing with somebody that believes it really, really deeply, because there are parts of it that are true. It's the deeper implications that are different. There are parts of it that are true, like the idea that, oh yeah, if you're rich right now, you can play crypto way more than somebody that's not rich. If you're rich right now, you can buy way more Bitcoin. You can pay for a Bitcoin mining farm that regular people would never be able to afford and get even more. And to a certain extent, there is some truth to the idea that the rich will continue to get richer in this space. But what I keep coming back to is that, like, on the primordial level of what sustains that value, a system that does not require violence, I do not care if Jeff Bezos is as rich as he is. What if that value by default has to be pro-social?
Well, yeah, I think that that's something that we really do need to think about is not just, again, it's not the physical material value of the thing. It's what it means, and it's the potential that it has. I know for myself, I personally didn't look farther into Bitcoin to begin with, because the first time I'd ever heard of it, outside of my crazy friend who we thought was insane for investing any amount of money into it.
Magic internet money.
He just bought like a loft in New York City not that long ago, so he's doing great. Who's laughing now? But the next time I heard about it was Silk Road. And
yes,
not because of Silk Road getting busted. This was back when it was a thriving marketplace, and people I knew were buying very illegal things with Bitcoin because it was untraceable. Mm-hmm. And I say untraceable because they were scrambling, the bank transactions and all that stuff at that point. But it certainly put me off. It absolutely put me off, where I was just like, do we want to value something that puts dangerous things in people's hands where they might not have access to it otherwise? And, with some distance at this point, I can say, like, again, that's kind of a worst possible case scenario thing. And the value that it really does carry feels quite a bit more than its potential to be used for nefarious purposes. But, there are always going to be people who say, like, it has that potential, we need to burn it down. So nuance is,
and then there's also
everything.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, there's also the where my brain immediately goes with the idea that Bitcoin's for criminals, Bitcoin is bad for the environment, all the bad things about it. All you have to do is, like, look a little bit to the left and look at the system we're using, and say, is this better? Are you not able to do truly nefarious things?
Yeah.
In fact, when your monetary system is controlled by and determined by a tiny group of probably the most psychopathic people that a system can create, is that better? Is it better for you to have a monetary system that allows regular ass people to buy illicit substances online, or is it better to have a system that empowers an elite to have complete dominance over everyone. I mean, you know, there's one of the I've got a couple of screenshots that I keep in my phone, like certain memes and things that I'm like, oh, I know when to use this. And one of them is a screenshot of a news article that came out a couple years ago, and it kind of flew under the radar a little bit. There was a shipping vessel that got busted by the United States government for shipping like 20 tons of cocaine. It was owned by JP Morgan, right? Like the banks are engaged. All the criminal behavior that they're talking about with what Bitcoin allows individuals to do, all that behavior is currently being done on the scale that we can't even imagine. Andreas Antonopoulos calls them mega crimes. Mega crimes are being committed on a daily basis by the institutions that have all the power to do whatever the hell they want with no accountability, because they're the ones with the power to hold people accountable. So like, they're just gonna. So yeah. So when people, when any argument about the morality of cryptocurrency is posited, I drop that meme. I'm like, yeah, tell me how the old system is better. It's not. There's always going to be good and bad. I just think that giving the individual person the power rather than a single centralized institution is probably better. Oh, you got a dog too?
I do. I'm taking off her collar because she was about to shake and we were going to get bells tingling. And I forgot to do that before. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the question is, you know, who do you want controlling what happens? We've been looking at a system where there are very few people at the top. And there's really no room for mobility. You know, I think the American dream posits that if you work hard and you get the right education and you apply yourself, you can be anything you want. And that's fundamentally incorrect. You know, we don't have that much mobility. Certainly, if you work hard and apply yourself, you can maybe raise yourself out of some really icky circumstances, but you're never going to be Jeff Bezos. Well, I guess maybe you could be, I don't know.
I would say that with Jeff Bezos, like, the thing is, the richest people in the world become that rich because they are comfortable engaging in a certain level of antisocial behavior.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was.
It is what it is.
Manipulation, but yeah, that's antisocial behavior. You know,
like,
people who are okay with taking advantage of people.
Yes.
And it's not as simple as work hard, get ahead. Where, you know, that system now seems to be fundamentally challenged. And you know, I heard a friend tell me that his high school aged son is up 20% on his stock portfolio. And I'm just like, your son has a stock portfolio? And he's like, oh yeah, GameStop. GameStop totally got him involved. So, you know, this is literally a game changer. This could be the work hard, get ahead, but not work hard with your time and your sweat and your blood. This is work hard and know what you're looking at and learn your numbers and engage in something you genuinely believe in. I think that was another thing that kind of came up at the beginning of all of this craziness last year, where so many people were out of jobs and thinking, you know what, maybe I start my own business, maybe I do my own consulting service, whatever small business idea they had, and kind of ran with it. And quickly learned, like, first of all, pandemic economy is not a great time to think you're going to make money doing anything, but also how much more difficult it is to work from home and be your own boss. And you know, it's not as simple as exchanging your time and energy by going to an office, doing your 8 hours and coming home. The benefit is not that you make your own schedule and don't have a boss. The benefit is that you get to put your belief into something that means everything to you. You don't have to sell your values to a corporation for a paycheck. You get to espouse whatever ideology, you know, means something to you, and put your all behind everything that you say and do. And that's the potential that this kind of monetary system has, which I don't know how many people who were, you know, maybe harping on some of the negatives have ever really considered.
Yeah. I mean, and because I think, yeah, it does, it's the cynicism and the assumption that it's more of the same. And when you reject new information because you assume you already know everything, you miss out on like the deeper analysis of like, okay, why does the old system work? what does this system do differently? Can we hold those next to each other and see if there's anything significantly? You're not gonna. It's that the beginner's mind thing. Like if you go into it thinking you don't know what the hell you're talking about, you end up coming out of it feeling like there's something really powerful and hopeful here. And then, I mean, I guess it's one of the things where like I can't blame anybody for being beaten down by the system, but I guess I've never really gotten into that headspace of there's no hope, I may as well just cope. Like I've always been looking for a way out, and like I remember I actually had a flow. I record videos and audio of myself just walking around my house sometimes. I had a flow recently about how I think a big part of the reason I'm so excited about cryptocurrency in general is because I have given up on politics. Like as a vector for change, as a vector for the kind of change we need, with all the news you hear about how bad climate change is and how bad, like I have basically determined that the legacy systems we have can't do it. That you're never going to have a corporation become altruistic all of a sudden. You're never going to have people stop corrupting members of Congress through lobbying and donations. It's all, the incentive structures are all baked in to ensure it happens. It's the reason that you have mega rich people on top, and it's the reason that you have so many people out there that look at cryptocurrency cynically, because this system has just beaten down, like it beats your idealism out of you, you know? Like you for my part, it was suddenly in 2016, it was Bernie Sanders. When Bernie Sanders came out and announced his candidacy and said that, you know, I felt like, oh, this guy's saying the thing. And more than anything, the thing that really stood out to me about Sanders was crowdfunding, right? I mean, say what you will about his personality, about his efficacy in Congress. Don't really care about that. What I cared about was crowdfunding, because I understand inherently that our system only gives a damn about profit and about money. Money talks, and as a result, every single person that participates in the political structure has to do something to get money. And here was a person that was showing that it was possible to raise money from small donations from regular people rather than relying on the oligarchs who bend the rules to their whim. And I thought, oh geez, here's a chance. Maybe we can actually use technology to fix it through politics. And then, you know, that didn't work. And so I got to a point where now I see cryptocurrency, and what I see is I'm like, okay, in my mind, fundamentally we have to change the incentive structures behind everything. We have to dig deep enough and get to the seed, the root of why everything is the way it is. And then I look at cryptocurrency and I'm like, okay, this is the thing. This is the thing. This is everything's leading up to this. And now finally we're living through this historical time where there's a technology that is a different monetary seed, and it's going to bear a different fruit, and it's going to take time, right? Like it's not going to just happen overnight, but it can happen now, I think. And that gives me so much hope, so much optimism. Like literally since the games, it's so funny that it was GameStop. But since that happened, I've been in just a much more hopeful mood for the future in general. GameStop. They stopped the game.
I definitely agree. I think that the GameStop and the stonks of 2021 are definitely, like, that was my turning point where I spent a lot of time looking at some of the technologies that were coming up, especially when it comes to, you know, there's other uses I've seen happening for blockchain technology and getting people's identities really baked into a system that struck me as very icky in a lot of ways. But when you look at it, it's really a lot of large corporations still, you know, pushing this technology to the icky place.
Trying to centralize it.
Oh, exactly. No, exactly. They're trying to centralize exactly the thing that
conquer it and own it.
Yes, but yet then GameStop came along and people rallied, and it was like, oh, no, wait, maybe we can do this. Maybe we can do this. And that was the first light of optimism I'd had in a very long time about any of this. So I totally agree with that. But that is, you know, the other thing that I think is, you know, again, I see both sides of this argument a lot of the times where it's like, yeah, people are going to use it for icky stuff, like big icky stuff, capital I. But that's the thing. It's always the turf war. It's always the biblical, like, culture conquering, like, let's take this and make it ours. And I think if this shows us anything, it's that we do have the power to really stop that from gaining popularity. There's also, I think, a lot of convenience that goes into people's decision making a lot of the times.
Absolutely.
Like, you could say Amazon is terrible and an evil company, but you probably still order things on Prime when you don't want to go to the grocery store. So,
it's a utility.
Exactly. So that's another thing that I think, we maybe need to think about as far as some of these things go. Like, again, using your belief as a value, as a monetary value, putting your literal material value into your ethical values. I think that could stop this from spiraling out of control, and all of the cynicism and all of the pessimism would probably not be there if we all just agreed to do what we believe in, like actually believe in, and maybe actually believe in things. Because I think a lot of people at this point are also kind of going like, when is there to believe in anymore? So.
Right. It's the sort of end of history myth, right? The idea that we figured it out, it's all done, and it's going to be this for the rest of time. It's like, now it doesn't have to be that.
I don't even see how that's possible at this point. Like, literally every week things change. So why do we think that this is going to be how it is? Because I don't think it's going to be this way in 3 months, let alone till the rest of maybe the world will end in 3 months. I don't know about that, but
we're gonna check social media after this call, and it's gonna be like, oh, something else crazy happened. Exactly. Everything's different now.
Exactly. And yeah, time is a weird loop. Like I said, I got really into ancient history last year, kind of as a means of comfort, to kind of show myself like, oh, this has happened before, but not nearly in the way that it's happening now. So the themes are there, but there's an escalation and there is an improvement in a way. I think that there's a healthy balance to be struck between being okay with how history works and how time goes and the cycles they're in. And certainly this is just another part of a larger cycle, but also understanding that it's a unique point. And nothing like this has ever happened before. The two meet somewhere in the middle, and it's up to us to kind of steer it with the good and leave the bad in the trough of this cycle.
I like to think about it in terms of thresholds. I think one of the more interesting fields of study that's come about in the last couple decades is the study of emergence, and the idea of order. Different level, like orders of magnitude, like different levels of order emerging from simple components, like complexity rising out of bundles of simple rules. And what we were talking earlier about aeons, and what was the word you used? The
egregore.
Egregore, yeah. Like I think that's a great example of emergence, right? And I think people don't necessarily think about it in those terms, but you're talking about the idea of a collective mimetic entity that emerges out of collective belief. It's simple interactions in human minds that slowly create this concept of an entity. I think with the system we're going through, one of the most interesting things about emergence is that you find that if you take a system, any system that has agents, actors, individuals, conscious beings, any large enough system, and if you change a small rule on a very primordial level, you can end up having radically different outcomes on the higher levels, right? The complexity that emerges out of simple levels, if you change the rules on the lower levels, it's the as above, so below thing in alchemy, right? Like with emergence, it's like if we could change the way that money itself works, the egregore or the aeon or what the thing that emerges out of it is going to have fundamentally different character. Now, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, that's really kind of, it's up to us to decide, I guess. But that's what gives me the most hope in the world right now, is that like our whole lives have been dominated by these themes of greed and dominance of the psychopathic and altruism literally being almost not a virtue because it doesn't make your life, like you give too much of yourself and it's the scarcity paradigm. And now I feel like we might actually be able to manifest an abundance paradigm, believe it or not. Like it's like we're on the precipice between a future of radical dystopianism and Star Trek. And I'm like, for the first time in my adult life, I'm like, Star Trek's possible. Like we could make Star Trek. How cool would that be?
It's a wild time to be alive. That's for sure. And I do think that, I think that the systems that we've lived within, we felt safety in them only as far as they were there, they seemed consistent, and we didn't need to question them, or we thought we didn't need to question them. And then all of a sudden, we did. And I have to admit, like, I've been around for a while, and never once did I think to question why the US dollar was worth a US dollar.
Exactly.
And then I find out that we just made it up because, they took away the gold standard and no longer was the entire world's currency, compared to what? Why? It's based on nothing. Okay, so then suddenly if I now look at the dollar in my wallet and go, this is based on nothing, a Bitcoin doesn't seem that wild. Digital currency actually seems perfectly logical. And the idea that, they're going to hand us money for whatever stimulus package and whatever, you go, where's that coming from? And suddenly, again, it's like, you know what? I'm going to put that into Bitcoin because this actually seems much more stable. So, when you actually question the systems that are in place, you might be surprised at how you've been living in instability for probably your entire life and just didn't think so. It's the blindfold that we all lived with has been taken off in a big way. And I think that, social media is a big reason for that. Yeah, news didn't spread the way that it does. And I think at this point, social media is almost a more reliable form of news than most news. You can have you can have conversations with people.
You can follow diverse perspectives.
Exactly.
And I think that's ultimately you have to sort of crowdsource your news now, because if you just get it from every single central organization that gives news is going to have, everybody has an agenda.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's much better to just have as many agendas as you can so you can think about everything everybody's saying, rather than just picking somebody and saying, no, I trust everything they say.
Yeah. Have you seen Network?
Mm-mm.
Oh boy, go watch Network. That's a trip. 1977, but it was so prescient. Like it was 2020.
Wow.
The idea basically that, your news does come from somewhere and you might never know where it comes from or why or who's putting it in front of you. And, we didn't always have a choice. We do now. We can, we have an entire library of information at our fingertips at any given point in time. And while that can be dangerous at times because we're not really meant to care about so much at one time, but at the same time, any questions you have can be answered. And if a question pops up, it's probably worth looking into because you might be surprised at how it stretches your reality in a new direction.
And then everything after that, totally different future.
Yeah. This is unprecedented, wild times. I think I say that like 5 times a day.
Well, I feel like this is probably a good spot to wrap up, right?
Yeah.
That was a good conversation, Fairlie. Hot dog.
Thank you. I spent all week listening to Robert Anton Wilson going, I feel like he would have a lot to say about all of this. So I came at it from very, very deep places on the internet, but
There's a lot of rabbit holes out there.
Oh yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and us being able to do this.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm looking forward to having another conversation with you sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Hopefully I'll be able to get you Anthromancer by then.
I'm very excited to play with it when it comes. So
Yeah.
yeah, wherever that is in the production process, that's exciting.